Maya Chen pushed her way through the crowded hallway of Riverside University's music building, clutching her warm backpack tight against her chest. The sound of classical music drifted from every practice room, each note perfect and polished. She winced as she heard a student effortlessly playing a piece that had taken her months to learn from scratchy. YouTube videos. The 19-year-old girl found her usual spot in the back corner of the main concert hall, where the old wooden seats creaked just enough to mask any sound she might accidentally make. She pulled out her crumpled sheet music. Pages yellowed from countless hours of practice in her family's tiny apartment. The margins were filled with her own handwritten notes, corrections, and fingering suggestions she'd figured out through trial and error. Around her, other music students chatted easily about their private lessons, summer conservatory programs, and expensive instruments. Maya listened with a mixture of fascination and envy. These students spoke casually about opportunities that seemed like distant dreams to her. They mentioned teachers whose names she only knew from album covers at the library, competitions she'd never heard of, and music camps that cost more than her family made in a month. Her fingers unconsciously moved across her lap, following along. As a senior student began playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1, Maya had taught herself this piece 2 years ago, spending endless nights with headphones on, rewinding the same sections over and over until her neighbors complained about the sound of piano keys clicking at 2 in the morning. She'd used an old electronic keyboard her uncle had found at a garage sale, half the keys sticking and the volume dial broken. The student on stage hit a particularly challenging passage, and Maya's heart raced as she remembered her own struggle with those same measures. She'd spent weeks trying to figure out the proper fingering, her small hands stretching painfully to reach octaves that seemed impossible. There had been no teacher to guide her, no one to show her the shortcuts or explain the theory behind the music. Everything she knew came from countless hours of listening, watching, and experimenting. Her calloused fingertips told the story of her musical journey better than any resume could. While other students had smooth hands from years of proper technique, Maya's fingers bore the marks of someone who had fought for every note. Late nights practicing on a keyboard placed on her kitchen table, the sound turned down so low she could barely hear it. Her mother washing dishes nearby, occasionally humming along to melodies she recognized. Maya's family had immigrated from Taiwan when she was 7, her parents working double shifts at a local restaurant to make ends meet. Music lessons were a luxury they simply couldn't afford. When Maya showed interest in piano, her father had looked at lesson prices and shaken his head sadly. "Maybe someday," he'd said, the same words he used for many things they couldn't have, but Maya's love for music couldn't be contained by their financial reality. She discovered the university's music building was open to the public during certain hours, and she began sneaking in to listen to student performances. At first, she sat near the back, afraid someone might ask her to leave. But weeks passed, and no one seemed to notice the quiet Asian girl who appeared for every concert and masterclass. She learned to read music by checking out beginner books from the library, working through exercises on pieces of paper when she couldn't access a piano. The librarian, Mrs. Rodriguez, began setting aside new music books for her, understanding without words being spoken that this young woman was hungry for knowledge. She couldn't afford to buy. The breakthrough came when Maya discovered the practice rooms in the university's basement were sometimes left unlocked late at night. She began staying after the building officially closed, slipping downstairs to practice on real acoustic pianos. The sound was nothing like her electronic keyboard at home. Each note had weight and substance, responding to her touch in ways that made her heart soar. Those stolen hours in the practice rooms became sacred to Maya. She'd arrive with her backpack full of sheet music she'd printed from free online sources, staying until the security guard's footsteps echoed down the hallway. She learned to pack up quickly, slipping out through a side door that didn't quite latch properly. Her technique was unconventional, developed through pure instinct rather than formal training. She'd never learned proper posture or hand position from a teacher. Instead, she'd developed her own methods based on what felt natural and what produced the sounds she heard in her head. Sometimes this led to bad habits that made difficult passages even harder. Other times, it resulted in unique interpretations that captured emotions in ways textbook technique might not. The other students began to notice her presence, though they didn't know her story. They saw a quiet girl who always sat alone, who seemed to know every piece being performed but never spoke up during discussions. Some assumed she was shy. Others thought she might be auditing classes without permission. None of them guessed that she was teaching herself everything they were learning in formal lessons. Maya's parents remained unaware of her musical pursuits. They worked such long hours that they rarely asked about her activities beyond school. She told them she was studying in the library, which wasn't entirely untrue. The music building had become her second home, a place where she could dream of possibilities beyond her current circumstances. Her younger brother Kevin sometimes caught her practicing finger exercises while doing homework, her hands moving silently across the kitchen table. "What are you doing?" he'd ask, and she'd brush off the question, not wanting to burden him with dreams that seemed impossible to achieve. The day everything changed started like any other. Maya had heard through whispered conversations that a famous pianist was coming to give a master class. Elena Volkov was a name she knew well from the classical music albums she borrowed from the library. The woman had performed with major orchestras around the world, had recorded albums that Maya had listened to hundreds of times. Maya arrived early that morning, claiming her usual seat in the back corner. She watched as students filed in, many of them dressed more formally than usual. The energy in the room felt different, charged with excitement and nervous anticipation. Teaching assistants set up recording equipment while professors huddled together, discussing logistics in hushed tones. As the room filled, Maya felt smaller and more out of place than ever. She noticed how the other students carried themselves with confidence, how they spoke about their musical experiences with casual authority. She pulled her worn sheet music closer, suddenly self-conscious about the crumpled pages and handwritten notes that marked her as different. When Elena Volkov finally entered the room, the conversation stopped immediately. She was smaller than Maya had imagined, with steel gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to take in every detail at once. Her presence commanded attention without her saying a word. Maya held her breath, honored to be in the same room as someone whose recordings had shaped her understanding of music. What Maya didn't know was that her quiet presence in the back corner hadn't gone unnoticed. Elena Volkov had spent decades identifying talent, and something about the girl with the worn sheet music and unconsciously moving fingers had caught her attention. The master class was about to become something neither of them expected. Elena Volkov stood at the front of the concert hall, her sharp eyes scanning every face in the audience. The famous pianist had this way of looking at people that made them feel like she could see straight into their souls. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats as her gaze passed over them, some sitting up straighter, others trying to shrink into their chairs. Maya felt her heart hammering against her ribs as those piercing eyes moved closer to her section. She had been coming to these master classes for months, always managing to blend into the background. Today felt different, though. Today, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to be discovered. "Before we begin," Elena said, her voice carrying easily through the hall without needing a microphone, "I want to address something I've noticed during my time here this week." The room fell completely silent. Even the usual whispers and shuffling of paper stopped. Maya's palms began to sweat as she gripped her worn sheet music tighter. Elena began walking slowly down the center aisle, her heels clicking against the wooden floor with each deliberate step. "I've been observing all of you, not just during performances, but during every moment you think no one is watching." Maya's breathing became shallow. She had been so careful, so quiet. How could anyone have noticed her? "There's someone in this room," Elena continued, now halfway down the aisle, "who has been silently playing along to every single piece performed this week. Someone whose fingers move with the music even when they think they're hidden in the shadows." Several students turned their heads, looking around curiously. Maya felt her face burning with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to melt into The old wooden chair and never be seen again? Elena stopped walking and pointed directly at Maya's corner. You, the young woman in the back with the stack of well-worn sheet music? Stand up. Maya's world seemed to tilt sideways. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not this. She looked around desperately, hoping Elena might be pointing at someone else, but every pair of eyes in the room had turned to stare at her. I think there's been a mistake, Maya stammered, her voice barely audible. No mistake, Elena replied firmly. I've been watching you for 3 days. You know, every piece that's been played. Your fingers follow along with perfect timing, and I can see the music moving through you even when you're trying to stay invisible. Maya slowly stood up, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The other students were whispering now, some looking confused, others curious about who this quiet girl was that they'd barely noticed before. Come down here, Elena commanded, gesturing toward the grand piano on stage. I really can't, Maya sighed, shaking her head. I'm not even enrolled in the music program. I just just like to listen. Elena's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Child, I've been teaching for over 30 years. I know real musical passion. When I see it, and what I see in you is something that can't be taught in any classroom. Maya began moving down the aisle, each step feeling like she was walking toward her doom. The other students watched her with growing interest. Some recognized her as the quiet girl who always sat alone, but most were seeing her for the first time. What's your name? Elena asked as Maya approached the stage. Maya-chan, she whispered. Well, Maya-chan, I have a theory about you. I think you've been learning music on your own, haven't you? Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. I thought so. I can tell by the way you hold yourself, the way your eyes follow the music. You're hungry for it in a way that formal students sometimes lose. Elena walked over to the piano bench and patted it. Sit. Maya approached the beautiful grand piano like it might bite her. She'd practiced on instruments like this during her secret late-night sessions, but never in front of an audience. Never with everyone staring at her. I don't have anything prepared, Maya said, hoping this might be her escape route. Elena smiled. And for the first time, it wasn't entirely kind. Oh, but you do. You have everything prepared. Every piece you've been silently playing along with this week. Every melody that's been running through your head. The room was so quiet Maya could hear her own heartbeat. She sat on the bench, her hands hovering over the keys like she was afraid to touch them. Tell me, Maya, Elena said, walking around the piano so she could see Maya's face. What's the most difficult piece you've ever attempted to learn? Maya's mind raced. Should she lie? Should she downplay her abilities? I don't know what you mean. Of course you do. There's always that one piece that calls to you, the one that seems impossible, but you can't stop trying to master it. What's yours? Maya's throat felt dry. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, she admitted quietly. A murmur went through the audience. Several students exchanged surprised glances. That piece was notorious among pianists. Known for breaking even the most skilled performers, Elena's eyes lit up with something that looked almost dangerous. Perfect. Play it. What? Maya's voice cracked. You heard me. Play Rachmaninoff's third. First movement, right now. Maya's hands began trembling. I can't. I mean, I know parts of it, but I've never played it all the way through on a real piano. I learned it on a keyboard at home, and it's so different, and there's no orchestra. And, Excuses, Elena cut her off. I've heard enough excuses to last several lifetimes. What I want to hear now is music. Maya looked out at the audience, at faces that ranged from sympathetic to skeptical to openly curious about whether she would completely humiliate herself. She thought about her parents working their double shifts, never knowing their daughter had been sneaking into university buildings to chase an impossible dream. I really don't think this is a good idea, Maya said. Her voice shaking. Elena leaned down so only Maya could hear her next words. Child, I've traveled the world performing in the greatest concert halls. I've heard thousands of talented students play perfectly acceptable music. But what I haven't heard in a very long time is someone play with real hunger, with real need. I think you have that hunger. Prove me right. Maya's fingers found their way to the keys almost without her permission. The smooth ivory felt cool under her fingertips, so different from the plastic keys of her home keyboard. She could feel the weight of the hammers, the responsiveness of the instrument. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Then don't do it, Elena said, stepping back with crossed arms. Go back to your corner seat, keep being invisible. Keep dreaming about music instead of making it. Something in Elena's tone sparked anger in Maya's chest. Not anger at Elena, but anger at the situation, at the unfairness of having musical dreams she couldn't afford to pursue properly, at years of practicing in silence while others got the opportunity she could only imagine. Maya positioned her hands over the keys, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, something had changed in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Determination. The same fierce determination that had kept her practicing on a broken keyboard until 2 a.m, that had driven her to teach herself to read music from library books, that had made her risk getting in trouble by sneaking into practice rooms. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 were about to fill the concert hall, played by a girl who had never had a real piano lesson in her life. The silence in the concert hall became so thick you could almost touch it. Maya sat frozen at the grand piano, her hands hovering just above the keys like she was afraid they might burn her. Every person in that room knew what Elena had just asked her to do, and most of them couldn't believe it. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 wasn't just any piece of music. It was a monster. Professional pianists spent years preparing for it, and even then, many refused to attempt it. The piece was so technically demanding that it had ended careers and broken spirits. Students whispered stories about pianists who had attempted it too early and never recovered their confidence. In the third row, a senior music student named David leaned over to his friend. She's going to crash and burn, he whispered. I've been studying piano for 15 years and I wouldn't dare touch that piece. His friend nodded grimly. Elena's being cruel. That girl doesn't even look like she's had proper lessons. But Elena wasn't being cruel, though it might have seemed that way to everyone watching. She had spent her entire career learning to spot, something that couldn't be taught in any conservatory or music school. She could see raw talent that burned so bright it could overcome technical imperfections. She had seen it in Maya's unconscious finger movements, in the way her whole body responded to music, even when she thought no one was looking. Maya's mind was racing through every memory she had of this piece. She had first heard it 3 years ago while browsing classical music videos online, looking for something challenging to work on. The opening had grabbed her immediately. Those haunting notes that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. She had spent months learning it. Bit by bit on her old electronic keyboard, rewinding YouTube videos countless times to catch every nuance. Her neighbors had complained about the sound of clicking keys at all hours, but Maya couldn't help herself. The piece had gotten into her blood in a way that nothing else ever had, but learning it on a cheap keyboard with half-broken keys was completely different from playing it on a concert grand piano in front of an audience. The keyboard at home had no weight to the keys, no real resonance. She had never felt how the piece was supposed to sound, only heard it in her headphones. Maya's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them against her thighs to try to stop the trembling. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see if she would completely humiliate herself. Some faces looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few seemed almost eager to watch her fail. Take your time, Elena said, but there was an edge to her voice that suggested patience wouldn't last forever. Maya tried to remember the opening measures. The piece started quietly, almost hesitantly, before building into something magnificent and terrifying. She had always connected with that opening because it felt like her own story, starting small and uncertain but growing into something bigger. Her fingers finally touched the keys, and the sound that came out was nothing like what she was used to. The grand piano responded to her touch with a richness and depth that made her gasp. Even that first tentative note carried more emotion than anything she had ever produced on her keyboard at home, but the difference was also terrifying. Every small mistake would be magnified on this instrument. Every uncertainty in her technique would be obvious to everyone listening. She realized with growing panic that she had no idea how to control this level of sound and sensitivity. Maya started to pull her hands back from the keys. "I can't do this," she said, her voice barely audible. "Can't or won't?" Elena asked sharply. The question hit Maya like a slap. She thought about all the times she had told herself she couldn't do things because of her circumstances. She couldn't take real lessons because her family couldn't afford them. She couldn't perform because she didn't have the right training. She couldn't dream too big because dreams like hers didn't come true for people like her. But here she was, sitting at a beautiful piano, being asked to play music that lived in her heart. How many times had she dreamed of a moment exactly like this? How many nights had she fallen asleep imagining herself at a real piano, playing for people who understood music the way she did? Maya looked out at the audience again. She saw Professor Williams, who taught the advanced students and always looked so serious during performances. She saw clusters of music majors who had every advantage she'd never had, sitting there waiting to judge her attempt at something they wouldn't dare try themselves. But she also saw something else. In the very back of the hall she spotted Mrs. Rodriguez, the librarian who had been quietly supporting her musical education by saving books and sheet music. The older woman caught Maya's eye and gave her the smallest nod of encouragement. Maya turned back to the piano and placed her hands on the keys again. This time, she didn't pull away. The opening measures of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 began to fill the concert hall, but they sounded different than anyone expected. Maya's unconventional technique, developed through years of self-teaching, created phrasing that was unique and personal. Where other pianists might play the opening with textbook precision, Maya played it with the uncertainty and hope of someone who had learned every note through pure love of the music, but the piece was unforgiving. Within the first minute, Maya encountered a passage that required her to stretch her small hands across intervals that felt impossible. She had practiced this section hundreds of times on her keyboard, but the grand piano demanded different finger positions, different pressure. She stumbled, hitting a wrong note that rang out clearly in the silent hall. Several students winced, and Maya felt her face burn with embarrassment. She stopped playing and put her hands in her lap. "Keep going," Elena said immediately. "I made a mistake," Maya said. "Of course you did. This is Rachmaninoff's third, not a beginner's exercise. The question is whether you're going to let one wrong note stop you from playing the rest of the piece." Maya had never performed in public before. She didn't know that every professional pianist made mistakes, that the measure of a performer wasn't perfection but how they recovered from errors. All she knew was that she had failed in front of everyone. "I don't think I can continue," Maya said. "Then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you had?" Elena replied. The room was so quiet that Maya could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. She thought about her parents working their long shifts, so she could have opportunities they never had. She thought about all the hours she had spent teaching herself. Dreaming of moments like this, Maya lifted her hands to the keys one more time. This time, when she began to play, something was different. The embarrassment was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. She had nothing left to lose now. Everyone had already seen her make a mistake. The worst had already happened. She began to play not for the audience, not for Elena, not even for herself. She played for every late night spent practicing in silence, for every piece of music she had taught herself note by note, for every dream that had seemed impossible but had somehow led her to this moment. Maya's fingers settled on the keys for what felt like the 100th time, but something had shifted inside her. The fear was still there, sitting heavy in her chest, but it was no longer in control. She had already made a mistake in front of everyone. She had already been exposed as the girl who didn't belong here. What was the worst that could happen now? She closed her eyes and let herself remember why she loved this piece so much. It wasn't because it was famous or because it would impress people. It was because the music told a story that felt like her own life. The struggle, the hope, the moments of doubt followed by determination to keep going when Maya began to play again. The first thing everyone noticed was that she had stopped trying to play it perfectly. Instead, she was playing it honestly. Her hands moved across the keys with a fluidity that came from muscle memory built through thousands of repetitions. But more than that, they moved with purpose. The opening theme emerged from the piano not as a technical exercise, but as something alive. Maya had learned this piece during some of the hardest months of her life, when her father had been laid off from the restaurant and her family wasn't sure how they would pay rent. She had practiced it on silent keys while her parents argued about money in the next room, pouring all her worry and hope into those melodies. Now, all of that emotion came flooding back through her playing. The notes carried the weight of every sacrifice her family had made. Every night she had stayed up late teaching herself music theory from library books. Every time she had wondered if her dreams were too big for someone like her. In the audience, the whispering had stopped completely. The students who had been expecting to witness an embarrassing failure found themselves listening to something they had never heard before. This wasn't the polished, technically perfect performance they were used to hearing in master classes. This was something raw and real. Professor Williams, who had been teaching piano for over 20 years, felt his breath catch in his throat. He had heard this piece performed by world-renowned pianists, but he had never heard it played with this kind of emotional honesty. Maya's unconventional technique, which should have been a weakness, was somehow creating nuances that made the familiar melody sound fresh and deeply personal. Maya's small hands stretched across the keyboard, reaching for intervals that were almost too wide for her fingers. Where other pianists might use pure technique to conquer these passages, Maya had developed her own solutions. She used the sustain pedal differently, creating overlapping sounds that filled in the gaps her reach couldn't cover. She shifted her hand positions in ways that would make a classical teacher cringe, but that allowed her to maintain the emotional flow of the music. The first major technical passage arrived, the part that had caused her to stumble earlier. Maya's heart rate spiked as she approached it, but this time she didn't slow down or hesitate. She had played this section so many times on her keyboard at home that her fingers knew what to do even when her mind was paralyzed with fear. The passage flew by in a blur of notes, not perfectly, but with such conviction that the small imperfections felt intentional rather than accidental. Maya had never learned that she was supposed to be afraid of fast passages, so she played them with the same fearless intensity she brought to everything else. Elena stood transfixed at the side of the stage. She had challenged Maya, hoping to see potential, but what she was witnessing went far beyond potential. This was instinctive musicality that couldn't be taught. Maya was making interpretive choices that graduate students struggled to understand. Not because she had studied them, but because she felt them. The piece moved into its lyrical middle section, and here Maya's lack of formal training became an unexpected advantage. She had never been taught the correct way to phrase these melodies, so she phrased them the way they made sense to her heart. Her rubato was unconventional but deeply expressive, stretching and compressing time in ways that made the music breathe like a living thing. In the third row, David, the student who had predicted Maya would crash and burn, found himself leaning forward in his seat. He had spent years trying to master the technical aspects of piano playing, but he was realizing that Maya possessed something he had never learned to access. She wasn't just playing the notes. She was living inside the music. Maya's whole body moved with the rhythm, swaying slightly as she navigated the complex passages. She had never been taught proper posture or been told to sit still while playing, so she moved naturally with the music's flow. This physical connection to the sound created a visual performance that was as compelling as the audio. The piece built toward its climactic passages, and Maya threw herself into them with abandon. Years of practicing on a keyboard that couldn't produce dynamic changes had taught her to create expression through timing and articulation instead. Now, on a piano that responded to every subtle variation in her touch, Those skills transformed into something magical. Her playing wasn't perfect by conservatory standards, but it was perfect for this piece at this moment in this room. Every phrase carried the authenticity of someone who had learned music not because they had to, but because they needed to. Music had been her escape, her comfort, her way of making sense of a world that often seemed unfair. The audience was completely silent now, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Earlier they had been silent with anticipation of disaster. Now they were silent with awe. Even the students who had initially been skeptical found themselves caught up in the emotional journey Maya was creating. Mrs. Rodriguez, the librarian, had tears in her eyes as she watched her quiet patron transform into something magnificent at the piano. She thought about all the music books Maya had checked out, all the hours she must have spent teaching herself what others learned in expensive lessons. The determination it must have taken to reach this level without any formal help. Maya approached the final section of the movement, the part that would bring this incredible journey to its conclusion. Her hands were tired now, and she could feel the strain of playing on an instrument so much more demanding than her keyboard at home. But she was so close to the end, so close to proving to herself that she belonged in this room, at this piano, making this music. The last pages of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 require not just technical skill but emotional stamina. The pianist must maintain intensity while executing some of the most challenging passages in the repertoire. Maya had reached this point countless times in her practice sessions at home, but never with an audience. Never with stakes this high. As she began the final push toward the conclusion, Maya felt something she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she wasn't playing music alone in her room or stealing practice time in empty buildings. She was sharing her music with people who understood it, and they were listening not with judgment but with recognition of something special happening before their eyes. Maya's hands struck the final chord of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, and for a moment that felt like forever, the sound hung in the air. The last notes seemed to echo not just through the concert hall, but through time itself, carrying with them all the emotion Maya had poured into every measure. Then came the silence. But this wasn't the uncomfortable silence from before, when everyone was waiting to see if Maya would embarrass herself. This was the kind of silence that follows something so unexpected and beautiful that people need a moment to process what they've just experienced. It was the silence of minds being changed and hearts being moved. Elena Volkov stood frozen at the side of the stage, her usual composed expression completely shattered. Her hands, which had commanded some of the world's greatest orchestras, were trembling. Her eyes, which had remained dry through decades of performances and accolades, were filling with tears she hadn't felt in 30 years. The music had transported Elena back to a place she rarely allowed herself to visit. She was 9 years old. Again, sitting at a broken-down piano in a tiny apartment in Moscow. Her family had nothing, just like Maya's. Her parents worked factory jobs and could never afford proper lessons. Elena had learned to play by listening to scratchy records and practicing on keys that stuck and pedals that didn't work. She remembered the hunger, the desperate need to make music that came from somewhere deeper than ambition or career goals. It was the need to transform pain into something beautiful, to take all the struggles of daily life and turn them into melodies that made sense of an often senseless world. Elena had forgotten about that hunger somewhere along the way. Success had a way of doing that to musicians. The fancy concert halls, the prestigious awards, the comfortable life that came with international recognition had slowly covered up the raw need that had originally driven her to music. She had become technically perfect, critically acclaimed, and emotionally distant from the very thing that had once saved her life. But Maya's performance had ripped away all those comfortable layers and reminded Elena of what music was really supposed to be. Not a display of technical mastery, though Maya had certainly shown she possessed that. Not a showcase of proper training, though she had somehow achieved sophistication without it. Music was supposed to be truth, spoken in a language that bypassed the brain and went straight to the heart. The tears Elena had been holding back for decades finally began to fall. She didn't even try to wipe them away. She stood there in front of a room full of students and colleagues, crying openly as she remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, unsure of what to do next. She could feel the emotional weight of what had just happened, but she didn't understand what it meant. She had played the piece as honestly as she knew how, but she had no idea that she had just given Elena Volkov the greatest gift possible, the reminder of her own musical soul. The audience remained silent, but Elena could see in their faces the same recognition she was feeling. These students, who had been trained to listen for technical perfection and theoretical accuracy, had just heard something that transcended all of that. They had heard music that came from necessity rather than ambition, from love rather than obligation. Professor Williams was the first to move. He stood up slowly, his academic mind struggling to process what his heart already knew. He had spent his career teaching students proper technique, correct interpretation, and scholarly approaches to classical music. But Maya had just shown him that sometimes the most profound musical education happened outside of any classroom. Elena finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Maya turned to face her, and Elena could see the same confusion in the young woman's eyes that Elena felt in her own heart. Maya didn't realize what she had just accomplished. She didn't understand that. She had just performed a piece that seasoned professionals approached with fear and respect, and she had done it with a maturity and emotional depth that most pianists never achieved. I taught myself," Maya said, her voice small and uncertain, "from YouTube videos and library books. I know my technique isn't right. I know I made mistakes." Elena walked slowly toward the piano, her steps careful and deliberate. She felt like she was approaching something sacred, something that might disappear if she moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. "Child," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion, "I have heard this piece performed by the greatest pianists in the world. I have played it myself in concert halls from Vienna to Tokyo, but I have never, in all my years of music, heard it played with such truth." Maya looked confused. "But I hit wrong notes, and my fingering isn't proper. And I never learned the right way to—" "Stop," Elena interrupted gently. "You think music is about playing the right notes in the right way at the right time, but that's not what music is. Music is about taking everything inside you, all your struggles and hopes and fears, and finding a way to share them with other people. That's what you just did." Elena reached the piano and placed her hand on the instrument's polished surface. "This piece, this impossible piece that breaks careers and crushes spirits, you didn't just play it. You lived it. You made it yours in a way that no amount of formal training could have taught you." The emotion in Elena's voice was becoming impossible to hide. She thought about her own journey, how she had clawed her way from poverty to international recognition. But somewhere along the way, she had lost the thing that mattered most. She had become so focused on playing music correctly that she had forgotten how to play it honestly. "You reminded me of something I had forgotten," Elena continued, her tears flowing freely now. "You reminded me why I started playing piano in the first place. Not because I wanted to be famous or successful, but because music was the only thing that made sense when nothing else did." Maya was staring at Elena with wide eyes, unable to comprehend that her self-taught, imperfect performance had moved this world-renowned artist to tears. She had spent so many years feeling inadequate, so many hours wishing she could afford proper lessons and real training. She had never imagined that her outsider status might actually be an advantage. Elena looked out at the audience, at the faces of students and faculty who had just witnessed something extraordinary. They were all watching her, waiting to see what would happen next. Elena realized that this moment wasn't just about Maya, it was about all of them. It was about remembering that music, at its core, was about human connection, not academic achievement. "This young woman," Elena said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke to the room, "has just shown us what we've been missing in our pursuit of technical perfection. She has shown us that the most important part of music cannot be taught in any conservatory or university. It has to be lived." Elena turned back to Maya, her decision already made before she fully understood what she was deciding. This girl needed guidance, but more than that, Elena needed to be around someone who still possessed the thing she had lost. They needed each other in ways that neither of them yet realized. Elena wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, not caring that everyone in the concert hall could see her vulnerability. For the first time in decades, she felt completely alive, completely present in a moment that mattered. More than any performance review or standing ovation she had ever received, she approached Maya slowly, as if she were approaching a frightened bird that might fly away at any sudden movement. Maya was still sitting at the piano bench, her hands folded in her lap, looking like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The girl's eyes were wide with confusion and something that looked like fear. "Maya," Elena said softly, kneeling down beside the piano bench so they were at eye level. "Look at me, child." Maya turned to face Elena, and in those young eyes, Elena saw herself 30 years ago. The same hunger, the same desperate love for music, the same feeling of being an outsider looking in at a world that seemed impossible. "To enter, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," Elena said. "How long have you been coming to these master classes?" Maya's cheeks flushed red. "About 6 months," she admitted quietly. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not even a music student, I just thought I wanted to learn." Elena nodded slowly. "And how did you learn to play like that? Really learn not just the technical aspects, but the emotional depth you just showed?" "US?" Maya looked down at her hands. "I don't know, I just ... When I play, I think about things. About my parents working so hard, about all the times I wanted something we couldn't afford, about feeling like I don't belong anywhere. The music helps me make sense of those feelings." Elena felt her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "That's it," she whispered. "That's exactly it. That's what music is supposed to do." She stood up and addressed the room, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the concert hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have been teaching for over 30 years. I have worked with some of the most technically gifted students in the world. But what this young woman just demonstrated cannot be taught in any classroom." Professor Williams leaned forward in his seat, fascinated by what he was witnessing. He had known Elena professionally for years, had seen her conduct masterclasses with clinical precision and professional distance. This emotional, vulnerable version of the famous pianist was someone he had never seen before. "Maya-chan," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "you have just given me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You have reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." Maya looked up at Elena with confusion. "I don't understand. I made mistakes. My technique isn't right. I've never had a real lesson in my life." Elena laughed, and the sound was rich with joy and recognition. "Child, your technique is perfect for what you need to express. Yes, we can refine it, make it more efficient, help you avoid injury as you play more demanding pieces. But the heart of what you do, the soul of your music, that cannot be improved because it's already exactly what it should be." Elena walked over to where Professor Williams was sitting. "Richard, I need to speak with you privately after this session." She then looked around the room at all the students. "All of you just witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a performance, but a reminder of what we're all here to pursue." She returned to Maya, who was still sitting at the piano looking overwhelmed. "Maya, I want to offer you something. I want to offer you the chance to study with me privately. Full scholarship, no cost to you or your family." The room erupted in whispers. Students who had been competing for years to get even a single lesson with Elena Volkov were watching a complete unknown being offered the opportunity of a lifetime. Maya's mouth fell open. "I what? I don't. That's not possible." "It's not only possible, it's necessary," Elena said firmly. "You need guidance to protect your hands from injury as you tackle more advanced pieces. You need someone to help you navigate the professional music world. And I." Elena paused, her voice becoming softer. "I need someone to remind me why I started this journey in the first place." Maya shook her head in disbelief. "But I can't afford private lessons with someone like you. My family doesn't have that kind of money." You're not listening, Elena said gently. I said full scholarship, no cost. In fact, I want to do more than that. Elena turned to address Professor Williams again. Richard, this university has performance opportunities, doesn't it? Recitals, competitions, masterclass performances. Professor Williams nodded, still stunned by everything he was witnessing. Yes, of course. We have monthly student recitals, and we host several competitions throughout the year. Elena turned back to Maya. Then here's what's going to happen. You're going to study with me twice a week. We're going to work on repertoire that challenges you but doesn't break you. And in 3 months, you're going to give your first formal recital right here in this hall. Maya felt dizzy. 3 months? But I've never performed in public before today. I don't know if I can't or won't. Elena asked, echoing the same question she had posed earlier. Maya, you just played one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire for a room full of strangers. A formal recital will be nothing compared to what you just accomplished. In the audience, Mrs. Rodriguez was crying happy tears. She had watched Maya check out music books for months, had seen the determination in the young woman's eyes, but she had never imagined it would lead to something like this. Elena knelt down beside Maya again. I know this is overwhelming. I know. It seems impossible. But sometimes the most important opportunities come when we're least prepared for them. The question is whether you're brave enough to say yes. Maya thought about her parents working their long shifts at the restaurant. She thought about all the times they had looked at prices for things they wanted to give her but couldn't afford. She thought about her father saying, maybe someday, with that sad smile she knew so well. What about my parents? Maya asked. They don't even know I play piano. They think I spend my time studying in the library. Elena smiled. Then I think it's time they found out they raised a remarkable daughter. Would you like me to meet them? To explain what this opportunity means? Maya's mind was spinning. Everything was happening so fast. An hour ago, she had been hiding in the back row, hoping no one would notice her. Now she was being offered the kind of opportunity she had only dreamed about in her most secret moments. I don't know what to say, Maya, whispered. Elena reached out and gently took Maya's hands in hers. They were small hands with calluses from years of practice on inadequate instruments. But they were also hands that had just created something beautiful enough to change lives. Say yes, Elena said simply. Say yes to the possibility that your dreams might actually come true. Say yes to finding out just how far your talent can take you. Say yes to becoming the musician you were meant to be. Maya looked out at the audience, at all the faces watching her with curiosity and amazement. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because she had proven she was perfect, but because she had proven she was real. 6 months had passed since that life-changing day in the university concert hall, and Maya could hardly recognize her own life. She stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world, wearing an elegant black dress that Elena had insisted on buying for her. Her hands, still bearing the calluses of her self-taught years, were now steady with confidence rather than shaking with fear. The journey to this moment had been nothing like Maya had expected. When she had finally said yes to Elena's offer that day, she thought the hardest part was over. She had no idea that accepting the opportunity was just the beginning of the most challenging and rewarding months of her life. The first hurdle had been telling her parents. Maya had come home that evening, her mind still spinning from everything that had happened, and found her mother and father exactly where she had left them that morning, working in their small kitchen, preparing vegetables for the next day's restaurant service. Mom, Dad, she had said, her voice trembling with nervous excitement, I need to tell you something. Her parents had looked up from their work, concerned by the unusual tone in their daughter's voice. Maya had never been one to make dramatic announcements or demand attention. I play piano, Maya had blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in her rush to get them out. I've been teaching myself for years, and today a famous pianist offered to give me lessons for free, and she wants me to perform in concerts. The silence that followed was perhaps the longest of Maya's life. Her father had set down his knife and stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. Her mother had frozen with a carrot halfway to the cutting board. "You play piano?" Her mother had finally asked. Maya had nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I know we couldn't afford lessons, so I learned on my own. I didn't want you to feel bad about not being able to pay for them." What happened next was something Maya would remember for the rest of her life. Her father, this quiet man who worked 80-hour days and rarely showed emotion, had walked over to her and wrapped her in the tightest hug she had ever received. "Play for us," he had whispered, "right now." That night, Maya had played on her old electronic keyboard for the first time with an audience that truly mattered. Her parents had listened with wonder and pride as their daughter revealed a part of herself they had never known existed. When she finished, her mother was crying, and her father was already planning how they could rearrange the apartment to give Maya a better practice space. The months that followed had been intense beyond anything Maya could have imagined. Elena had been a demanding teacher, but not in the way Maya expected. She didn't criticize Maya's unconventional technique or try to rebuild her playing from scratch. Instead, she worked to strengthen what Maya already had while protecting her from the injuries that could come from self-taught habits. "Your music comes from your heart," Elena had told her during one of their early lessons. "My job is not to change that, but to give you the tools to express it even more clearly." Maya had also discovered that the music world was smaller and more connected than she had realized. Word of her performance in the university masterclass had spread quickly among musicians and teachers. She began receiving invitations to play at events, small recitals where she could gain experience performing for audiences. Each performance had taught her something new. She learned how to manage stage nerves, how to recover from mistakes without losing her composure, and how to connect with audiences who might not understand classical music but could feel the emotion in her playing. The other music students at the university had initially been skeptical of Maya's sudden rise to prominence. Some whispered that she was just a novelty, a feel-good story that would fade once the initial excitement wore off. But as Maya continued to grow as a performer, even her harshest critics had to admit that her talent was undeniable. Professor Williams had become one of Maya's strongest supporters, incorporating her story into his lectures about the different paths musicians could take. "Mao Chun proves that musical education comes in many forms," he would tell his students. "Sometimes the most profound lessons happen outside any classroom." Now, standing backstage at Carnegie Hall, Maya felt the weight of how far she had come. Elena had arranged this debut performance as part of a special evening showcasing emerging artists. Maya would be performing the same piece that had changed everything 6 months ago, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, but this time with a full orchestra. The orchestra members had been skeptical when they first heard they would be accompanying a 19-year-old who had been playing seriously for less than a year. But during rehearsals, Maya's musicality had won them over completely. The concertmaster had told Elena privately that he had never worked with a soloist who communicated so naturally with the ensemble. Maya peeked out from behind the curtain and saw the audience filing into their seats. In the third row, she spotted her parents, wearing their best clothes and looking around the magnificent hall with expressions of amazement. Her father had taken time off work for the first time in years, and her mother had closed their section of the restaurant early. Mrs. Rodriguez was there too, sitting with several other librarians who had followed Maya's journey. The university music students had come in a large group, including some who had initially doubted her abilities. Even Professor Williams was in attendance. Beaming with pride at how far his unofficial student had progressed, Elena appeared beside Maya, elegant, in her own concert attire. Over the past months, she had become more than a teacher to Maya. She had become a mentor, a guide, and something like a musical mother. "How do you feel?" Elena asked, adjusting a small detail of Maya's dress. "Nervous," Maya admitted. "But good?" "Nervous, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Elena smiled. "That's because you are. 6 months ago, you were hiding in the back of a classroom, afraid to let anyone hear your music. Tonight you're about to share that music with one of the world's most prestigious audiences. Maya nodded, feeling the truth of Elena's words. She thought about the girl who had sat in the back corner of the university concert hall, clutching worn sheet music and hoping to remain invisible. That girl had dreamed of moments like this but had never truly believed they could happen. "Thank you," Maya said to Elena, "for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Elena's eyes filled with the same tears that had fallen during that first master class. "Child, you gave me back my love for music. I should be thanking you." The orchestra was tuning up on stage, and Maya could hear the audience settling into their seats. In a few minutes, she would walk out onto the stage where the greatest musicians in history had performed. She would sit at the same type of piano, where legends had created magic, but Maya wasn't thinking about the legends or the history or the prestige of the venue. She was thinking about her parents in the audience, about Mrs. Rodriguez who had quietly supported her musical education, about Elena who had taken a chance on an unknown girl with a dream. Most of all, she was thinking about the music itself, about the story she wanted to tell through Rachmaninoff's notes. The same story of struggle and hope and determination that had driven her to teach herself piano in a tiny apartment, that had given her the courage to keep practicing even when it seemed pointless, that had led her to this moment. The stage manager appeared beside them. "Miss Chen, you're on in 2 minutes." Maya took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She was ready to begin the next chapter of a journey that had started with a broken keyboard and a dream that seemed too big for a girl like her. As she prepared to walk onto the Carnegie Hall stage, Maya Chun knew that some dreams, no matter how impossible they seem, are worth fighting for.